Om Ganati Marandasya Garangana Sarakya Chaksuru and Meditam Yanatashmai Sri Gurave Namaha Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tito Jayodhira Nistuparayashu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevya Bhagavati Uttamashoki Bhaktir Bhavati Naistaki Nigamaka Parurgaritam Param Shukamakaramita Jobisam Tampibata Bhagatam Rashamam Maro Harushika Bhavi Bhagam krishna sadhu bhagate dhammagena karunasta dushamasha paranako dunoditam Twamapiya dabasuta vishwatam vibhusam apyarena vidam viducharam prakyahiduhu maridam sanklesha nirbanam usandi nanyatam Takvashadaram haranam bhujam hare bhajana pakvata patadhyare yakaktava vivarta bhutam kovartaptam shadam atyatatam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pasaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachari Nirvisheswani Varipaskata Desatai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrindam. Welcome to Motivational Monday, Raleigh, as well as Praveen. Thanks for joining us. Jean, appreciate your joining us. Stoka Krishna coming on board now. And I have to tell you, this is Motivational Monday. Since our last get-together on last Wisdom Wednesday, there have been a lot of developments, and we make it a policy not to comment on politics and things like that, but we're definitely in the Kali Yuga, folks. And we had a couple of nice calls. We had a Zoom call, I think it was last Thursday night, with the New Jersey of Bergen County congregation. About 50 people joined. And then last night, before the Sunday feast, making me actually a few minutes late to the feast itself, we had a Zoom call with the Maui, Hawaii congregation, about 10 people on board there, but I think they enjoyed our time together. So this is the silver lining to the pandemic. Get to preach to so many people and get acquainted with so many people that we would not have otherwise come into contact with. And isn't it a convenience? Although we're more housebound and a lot less mobile than we were before the COVID, we don't have to take the trouble to get into a 2-ton vehicle and drive several miles, 10, 15, 20 miles, to physically be present in a temple to hear some katha. We just have to turn on our TV, monitor, and go on Facebook Live or go on Zoom. And there are all kinds of options out there for transcendental speakers and communicators. So there's always good somewhere couched in the challenging and in the so-called negative. We're flipping over to another chapter. We finished with the third chapter, first canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, last Wednesday, and now we're moving on over into the fourth chapter. And I decided to skip, if you've got Bhagavatam before you, I've decided to skip to the second verse. So let's kick it off. Thanks for joining us, Govinda Dev. Anjali, I saw some of your nice presentation about Ekadasi. Very, very well done. You have a good panache. You have a good online flair. I hope that you'll do programs regularly. Manasa Ganga, thanks. Justin, Kali Yuga indeed is Justin's comment. All right. Our verse to kick off this week. Let's hope this week is a little quieter, less disruptive than last week. I just got to share this with you. It's so bizarre. We have a fellow that comes to the Sunday feast. He comes pretty regularly. He looks at his cell phone throughout the entire talk, and he has an Indian friend that they hang out with together. I don't know. We started talking about permits. I was talking about whether the health department would give us a permit to have the festival at the end of March. And some or other he parlayed into his commentary on the last Wednesday's storming of the Capitol building. I'm not going to make any commentary or anything, but just to show you how bizarre things are and how many weird things there are out there in the social media and how people fall for this kind of stuff. This fellow who comes to the temple regularly, I'm not sure he gets anything out of it, actually said in a very aggressive voice that the crowd that stormed the Capitol was actually the radical left wearing Trump hats. You can make of that what you will, but holy schmoly, what a weird world we're living in. What a weird segment of the Kali Yuga. Good morning, Rakesh. Good morning, Radhesham. Good morning, Sanjaya. Here's our verse. Sanaka Uvacha, the head of the sages assembled at Naimisharanya, is speaking on behalf of the sages by way of greeting Sutta Goswami, who himself has just come from hearing the celebrated conversation between Sukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Pariksit during the last 7 days of his death. So here's what Sanaka says to Sutta. Sutta Sutta Mahabhaga. Repeating Sutta's name twice and describing him as extremely fortunate. He has just heard the whole Srimad Bhagavatam narrated by no less than the son of the compiler of the Vedas, Vyasadeva, as it was imparted to Maharaj Pariksit. So you can imagine Sukadeva Goswami's head and ears are just full and in fact overflowing. Sometimes the impersonalists, they have this saying that when you're fully realized, you don't make any sound. You don't anymore have to speak or say anything or interact with people. They say a full pot makes no sound if you strike it. But we say realization, true realization, involves the person-to-person realization of the Bhagavan aspect of the Lord, face-to-face realization of the personality of Godhead, the result of which is that one's love, dormant love within the heart, overflows, and one doesn't stop speaking. Look at Prabhupada. Say the average woman says 30,000 words in a day, and the average man says 20,000 words in a day. I can't resist a joke at this point. That means that when the man has said everything that he is going to say in the day, the woman still has 10,000 more words. Anyway, how many words a day did Prabhupada speak? He far exceeded the normal of 20,000 for the men, far exceeded the normal of 20,000 for the women. And when he wasn't audibilizing, he was speaking in terms of writing. What we see in Prabhupada as a self-realized soul is someone who, once they become self-realized and the love of Krishna rises to a certain level, it doesn't stop, it doesn't settle, but it continues to rise, it continues to erupt like a volcano that never stops. Prabhupada never stopped speaking about, writing about, glorifying Krishna, even at the advanced age of 70, 75, 80, 82, on his deathbed. Literally, he had the dictaphone in front of him, still describing and glorifying Lord Sri Krishna. Now, that's the symptom of a self-realized soul. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asked Krishna, how do we know him? How does he walk? How does he talk? How does he comport himself? And one of the symptoms is he's Mahabhag. He's extremely fortunate himself. He's a liberated soul. And yet, that good fortune is something by nature. He can't keep it to himself. He doesn't hide it. He doesn't deprive others of his joy, of his peace, but rather he acts as a light to other ones. And therefore, Sanaka Rishi greets Sukadeva Goswami, Sutta Sutta Mahabhaho, Vado Nam Vadatam Vara, Katam Bhagavatim Punyam, Yad Aha Bhagavan Chukaha. O Sutta Goswami, you are the most fortunate and respected of all those who can speak and recite. Notice there's nothing said about sitting and being silent. He's speaking and reciting. The next thing he says is, please relate, please audibilize the pious message of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is spoken by the great and powerful sage Sukadeva Goswami. And this message in and of itself is called punya. It doesn't matter what history you bring to the kata, to the session, what bad choices you may have made in the past, what unfortunate circumstances surround your activities or your birth or your upbringing, your education or your lack of it. Doesn't matter. Bhagavatam itself is so powerful that it will negate any negative instances, karmic reactions which are following you or otherwise would overtake and overwhelm you. So it says here, Sutta Goswami was twice addressed herein by Sanaka out of joy. It's like if you see someone and you're really happy, Jim, Dora. You can't just say their name once, but you're suffering from an excess of happiness. So you shout out their name twice. So these sages, I don't know if you know the history, but they had assembled in the holy place of Naimisharanya to do a 1,000-year fire sacrifice. And they were a few years into it and feeling like this isn't the way to go. I'm not getting the juice. I'm not feeling it. In fact, all they got all of their efforts was just singed eyebrows and a cough from the smoke that the fire was giving off. They were all starting to wonder, man, I got another 995 years of this to go. And they're wondering and looking around and casting about for alternative solutions. So you can imagine their joy when Sutta Goswami comes among their midst and they say, can somebody put that fire out so we can turn our attention to hearing the nectarine, the kata amrita, the nectar flowing from the mouth of Sutta Goswami. It says, and here's a point too that Prabhupada makes in the purport. They recognized that Sutta Goswami was indeed fortunate. How can you tell if someone is in fact blessed with love of God, if they're fortunate? They're fortunate because they're no longer tyrannized by lust, anger, and greed. The more you advance spiritually, the more your material hankerings, meeting, illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, the more those dry up, wither, and blow away. So a truly fortunate, truly realized soul has no attraction for the sense gratificatory activities of this material world. He's peaceful, calm, self-contained. They recognize all these qualities in Sutta Goswami and thereby recognize him as a qualified person to potently transmit the message of the Bhagavatam to them. They had no interest in hearing the Bhagavatam from a bogus person who would interpret it in his own way to suit his own purpose. And it's very common in India, and many of these paid professional Bhagavatam reciters travel to the West and they do a 7-day presentation because Parikshit Maharaj heard from Sukadeva Goswami during the last 7 days of his life. It's become a custom to have a 7-day kata. Actually, we're enjoined Nashta Presho Badushu Nitya Bhagavata Seva Bhagavati Utamashaki Bhaktir Bhavati. We're enjoined to hear the Bhagavatam constantly, daily. It just so happened that Parikshit only had 7 days to live, and so he heard the Bhagavatam for 7 days. But we should hear the Bhagavatam every day, and we should never hear it from a bogus paid reciter who's taking the money to support his hedonistic lifestyle. Moreover, the impersonalists, those who are not devoted to Krishna, miss the whole message of the Bhagavatam, which is bhakti or devotional service to the Krishna. They'll interpret it, recite it in such a way as to twist some other non-Krishna meaning out of it. One famous Bhagavatam reciter, he said, Krishna plays the flute, right? The flute has holes, right? The holes are 0, right? Therefore, it is not to Krishna to whom you should surrender and devote yourself, but it is to nothingness, the energy, the void, the light. That's how he came and twisted the essential meaning of the Bhagavatam to support his own monistic, impersonalistic views. One thing you'll always find the paid reciters do, jump over the first 9 cantos, which explain the greatness of God, explain how Krishna is in fact aham sarvasya prabho mata sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajanti mam buddha bhava. Krishna says, from me everything comes, both the material and the spiritual world. Bhuta bhava samanvritaha. The wise worship me with all of their heart. And yet the paid Bhagavatam reciters misexplain this confidential relationship that the Lord has with his devotees. And they skip over all the preliminary cantos of the Bhagavatam in order to jump to the affairs of Krishna with the gopis. And they present them in a light which obscures the real, pure, selfless love that Krishna enjoys with the gopis. So to hear from a bona fide representative of Sukadeva Goswami is the greatest good fortune. That's why it says that the sages at Naimisharanya were not reserved. Normally sages are very cool and sober. There's not much that can, they're in between. They're not too high, they're not too low. Yukta hara vihadasha. Yukta, they're moderate in eating and sleeping and conversing. They're moderate in all things. But when they got the chance to welcome Sudha Goswami, and they were tingling in expectation, anticipation of hearing the Bhagavatam of Sudha Goswami, they uncharacteristically exhibited great joy in welcoming him. They were sitting on the edge of their asanas, couldn't wait for the katha to begin. They recognized that there is no higher valuable thing than to get association with the pure devotee of the Lord. I think it was Parikshit Maharaj himself who said, Tulyama lavanipi nashragam napavaganam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kim uta shishaham. To get even a moment's association with a pure devotee is more valuable than liberation itself, than the achievement of all material desires, or even elevation to the heavenly planets. Martyanam kim uta shishaham. These sages, they were not just going to get a moment's association with Sukadeva Goswami, but he was making himself available for the full recitation of the Bhagavatam and to answer to any questions that they might have had. So they were beside themselves with joy. These normally sober, self-contained, grave sages were bubbling literally with joy at the expectation of hearing from Sutta Goswami. I'm going to share a verse with you, and it's interesting because this verse is right there in the preface to the Krishna book. Before any other words are spoken or written, this verse stands right at the top of Prabhupada's preface to the Krishna book, which in fact is the summary study of the 10th canto. Prabhupada was quite elderly when he arrived in America and when he started translating the Srimad Bhagavatam. He had the first canto already done in India, and so he started on the second canto. But he was elderly, he had second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth cantos to translate before he could get to the very touchy subject matter of the 10th canto, and he wasn't sure he would have sufficient time. So what he did was he wrote the Krishna book. And in the Krishna book are all the philosophical explanations behind the loving pastimes of Krishna and devotees, presented in a proper way. He thought that in case I should pass away before getting to the translation and commentaries of the 10th canto, at least everyone would have the Krishna book, where Krishna's pastimes with the cowherd maidens of Vrindavan are properly presented. In the introduction, standing as the header, is this verse from the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Nivrita Taishayera Pigiyamana Bhavo Shota Chota Mano Biravat Kao Tamashoka Kanana Bara Pumamba Rajata Vina Pashigna. Prashant, thanks for joining us. He already put up Yuktahara Vihara Shah from the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. This is the 4th verse in the 1st chapter of the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the question is asked, considering all the benefits of associating with a pure devotee and hearing from them, they supersede the benefits of all material desires, elevation of heavenly planets, and even liberation itself. It makes all of these achievements dwindle into insignificance in comparison to the benefits that one gleans from even a moment's association of a pure devotee. So the question is asked, considering that everything about association with a pure devotee is pleasing, uplifting, inspiring, ultimately taking one back to the eternal kingdom of God where life is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, then the question is asked, who but the animal killer or the killer of the soul will not care to hear the glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Such glorification is enjoyed by persons liberated from the contamination of this material world. It is enjoyed by the liberated souls, such as the sages at Naimisharanya, but it is also enjoyed by the conditioned souls as well. There are any number of examples of the Bhagavatam, the Kumaras, Dhruva Maharaj, of those who were not on the level of devotional service, but through association with the pure devotee and hearing from them, they were raised up to the ultimate platform of loving devotional service of the Lord. The nature of Krishna is that he's all attractive. So when you hear the details of how it is that Krishna is all wealth, all fame, all strength, all knowledge, all beautiful, and all renunciation, how can one not be attracted? Aishwarya samagasha viryasya yasa jnanam vairagyasya sanam bhagami tingana. Parasara Muni gave the definition of God as he is full in 6 opulences: wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and humility. These are opulences to which we're attracted in this material world. We see someone who's exceedingly wealthy arrives in a limousine with a chauffeur with a $1,000 suit on. Attracts our attention, is it not? Famous, beautiful songster, movie star, turns all of our heads, isn't it? A wise, intelligent, Nobel Prize winner, PhD, gets our attention, is it not? And take Gandhi as an example of the 6th opulence, which is vairagya, or humility. Gandhi, as you know, was not particularly good looking. He was intelligent, but he wasn't world-class PhD, Nobel Prize category intelligent. He wasn't wealthy. He had no wealth whatsoever. So he lacked in the other 5 qualities: beauty, intelligence, wealth, and so on and so forth. But because he was humble, hundreds of thousands of people followed him. Hundreds of thousands of people attracted him. So think of God, who has all wealth, all beauty, all strength, all fame, all knowledge. There's no one who has more reason to be swell-headed, to be puffed up, than the possessor of all opulences in full, than that person from whom, wherever we see wealth and fame and strength and beauty, it originated in Krishna. He's the full-bodied form of all these qualities. So you would expect such a endowed personality, a supreme personality, to be very arrogant and taken with themselves. And yet, as no one is more beautiful than Krishna, no one knows more than Krishna, no one has more power than Krishna, no one, read my lips, is more humble than Krishna. No one is more humble than Krishna. When Mars, Yudhisthira, and Indraprastha was sponsoring the Rajasuya sacrifice, all the kings of the world arrived as the guests of Mars, Yudhisthira, to pay tribute to him. And Krishna insisted on having the job of washing the feet of all the incoming guests. Can you imagine? It should have been that each guest, as they arrived, should have washed Krishna's feet and paid homage to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna would not allow that just the opposite. Exhibiting his opulence of vairagya, humility, Krishna washed the feet of all the incoming guests. So who can be more attractive than Krishna? Whenever we're attracted to beauty, beautiful person, wealthy person, intelligent person, famous person, that is an indirect attraction to Krishna because it all comes from Krishna. Janmadiyas ya yataha nibhigitarish itarish chartashu avignesharatene brahmavidya. Krishna is the origin of everything that's attractive in this material world. And so whatever it is that we're attracted to, that is indirectly an attraction to Krishna. So who would be able to resist hearing about the all-attractive adventures and pastimes of the Lord from a pure devotee of the Lord? Prabhupada says that although India is fallen from its previous state of spirituality, it is still pretty much a fact that wherever there's a message about Krishna, wherever someone is speaking Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam, even if they're unbona fide, thousands of people still gather to hear. That indicates that such recitation of the Bhagavatam is still a common thing throughout all of India. If there's anything lacking in it, we would desire that it be done by persons freed from material desires. I haven't been to India for a few years. Been to India maybe 20, 25 times altogether, but I think the last time was almost 10 years ago. We've been so busy building 2 temples and doing color festivals that I really haven't had the free time to nip off to India in the last decade or so. But I remember many years ago when I went to Jaipur. At that time I had a little tiny briefcase-like battery-operated PA system with a microphone. And I like to go, I was living in Boston at the time at the temple there on Commonwealth Avenue. And I would go out in the evenings where people were coming up the subway. And I would just sit on the grass and open up my little speaker and start speaking. And inevitably, I would get a crowd around me in the evening. And so I went to India that year and took my little speaker system with me. The main devotional area in all of Rajasthan is the Radha Govindiji temple right there in Jaipur behind the palace. And in the mornings at that time, thousands and thousands of people used to congregate for Mangalarti. So we would go to Mangalarti and then chant japa, and then sometime in mid-morning, 9 o'clock or so, people are coming and going, milling around. I would sit down and just start speaking. Most people didn't understand English. They might recognize some of the Gita and Bhagavatam verses I was quoting, but they didn't understand English. But as soon as I would start speaking, the milling around was like all of a sudden it would go in slow motion. People weren't quite so quick to get here and there. They would check me out. They would linger more in their, slow down their ambulatory pace. And eventually they would just being attracted, even though they didn't understand what he was saying. They knew it was Katha. They would hear the name Krishna, Krishna. Ham sarvasya prabhu, yada yada hi dharmasya, paritanaya saranam. They would sit down. So here I am, speaking to 150, 200 people who are sitting with rapt attention, who don't understand 90% of what I'm saying. But that's the tendency to hear. And so the question is asked, Navrita Tarshira Bhagiyamano, Bhavoshoto Manojaraman, who can resist hearing about the all-attractive qualities of Krishna? And the answer is a killer of the soul, who is also a killer of the animals. Have you ever noticed that in order to eat the flesh of animals, you have to first delude yourself with the lie that animals have no soul? Some or other, if you acknowledge that animals have a soul, it makes it much harder to sink your teeth into their flesh. So that's what every meat eater tells themselves, how they rationalize their consumption of dead flesh. The animal has no soul. And they also, I've heard them say, Well, we're just animals. So in the wild, Ashtani Sahasranam, one animal is food for another. Animals eat each other, and we're just animals, and so we should go ahead and do the same. That's acting according to our natural propensities. And sure, I mean, if you want to be an animal, that's fine. And you will be an animal in your next life. If having achieved this human form, you don't distinguish yourself from your animals by your dietary preferences, by your choices of what you see and what you hear and whom you surround yourself as friends, if you don't cultivate a higher knowledge of the soul as apart from the body, then it is true. You are non-distinguishable from the animals, and having failed to capitalize on the great opportunity of this human form of life, you will not again soon get it. But fall down. Bhunkriti prakriti jargaram karanam gunasanga sat sarasat yona janmashu. You will take birth and meet with good and evil amongst the lower species of life. I heard that formerly in Europe, in the Middle Ages, butchers were prohibited from sitting on juries at murder trials. Why do you imagine that would be? Because when a butcher hears testimony about murder, and when it's incumbent upon him to make a decision whether the murder should be punished or not, he's going to have far too much, an inordinate amount of sympathy for the murder, isn't he? He can hardly be placed on a jury as an unbiased juror. He's murdering himself multiple times in a day, going to have an unbalanced amount of sympathy for the murder. Basically, I can picture a butcher sitting on a jury during a murder trial, thinking throughout the whole time, what's the big deal? Why is everyone making such a fuss about this? What's the purpose behind all this brouhaha? Thanks for joining us, Ram Kishore. Maitreya, you made a brilliant comment last week about some of our points. I encourage you to comment again today. Share with you a poem about meat eating by George Bernard Shaw. We are the living graves of murdered beasts, slaughtered to satisfy our appetites. We never pause at our feast to wonder if animals, like humans, have rights. We pray on Sundays to have light to guide our footsteps on the path we tread. We're sick of war, we don't want to fight. And yet we gorge ourselves on the dead. Like carrion crow, we live and feed on meat, never considering the pain and suffering we cause. If thus we treat defenseless animals for sport or gain, how can we hope to attain the peace we are so anxious for? We pray for it over hecatombs of slain to God, while outraging the moral law, cruelty begets its offspring, war. And we might add as an addendum, cruelty begets its offspring, war, comma, pandemic, because don't we all know that the current pandemic started in a meat market in China. Our peerless leader wanted to call it, slough off the responsibility by calling it the Chinese virus. But there have been plenty of viruses, notably the swine flu, which started in the pig farms in Nebraska. Now there's an immediate cause of suffering, there's a remote cause of suffering, and there's an ultimate cause of suffering. The immediate cause of suffering throughout the world, I think 4,000 people a day now are dying in America, and I think yesterday 238,000 people tested positive for the virus. So the immediate cause of suffering is the virus, and the scientists with their vaccinations address themselves to the immediate cause to relieve the symptoms of the suffering. However, hardly anybody goes beyond the immediate cause to identify the remote cause. The remote cause are your choices. The remote cause is your karma. And there's no more negative karma generated than that which comes about as a result of eating the flesh of animals. The virus itself is generated because of the worldwide addiction of people in general to the flesh of animals. So you're not going to end pandemics until you remove not only the immediate cause, but the remote cause. Unless and until people give up the practice of eating the flesh of slaughtered animals, there will be pandemics coming one after another. And so doing Operation Warp Speed and dedicating billions of dollars of resources to come up with a vaccine is well and good if you buttress that with a change in one's dietary habits. Then you will not see the pandemic again. But we don't do that. And so we better be prepared to go over the whole thing again. What is it that said? Those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. A couple of requests here about the origin of that quote. Prashant Pradyumna Narayan has already come up with it, but it's George Bernard Shaw. I'm not sure that he titled it, but I'm sure if you Google "We Are the Living Graves of Murdered Beasts" and George Bernard Shaw, it'll come up. Michelle shares with us, she says, I wrote about caring for others this morning. First thing I had in my mind as I woke was that individuals do not care enough about other beings. And she wrote some thoughts down regarding this. A good early morning meditation. When we rise early in the morning and chant, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, we're awakening our loving, caring feelings toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and through Him to all other living beings. This is the 25th verse from the 25th chapter, 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Satam pashangam mamavirya sambino bhavanti rikana rashayano kata tajjosha rishu pavarga vartmani sadharatir bhaktiranakakashin. Satam are the devotees, pure devotees. Satam, not interested in mental speculation, not running like animals after the stimulation of the senses, but rather identifying the nature of the soul and its subordination to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and stepping into that role. Satam prashangam. What are the recreational preferences of those who are purified from sense gratification and mental speculation? Mama virya sambido. Virya means heroic. From the Sanskrit word virya comes virile, and I would guess also the word Viagra, which means vitality, also derives from the Sanskrit word virya. So Krishna is the most powerful, the most strong, as well as the most discerning. There is no one more virile than Krishna. And so purified souls relish hearing the pastimes of Krishna. Now, if you hear Bhagavatam, especially 10th canto, from a paid reciter, you'll not realize how it is that Krishna stands head and shoulders above the narratives, the epics, the fictional stories about so-called made-up heroes. The difference between the pastimes of Krishna and those of ordinary man, or the characters that are generated from the writers of fiction, is that the liberated souls who have no interest in sense gratification or mental speculation relish the pastimes of Krishna, the love affairs, the conspiracies, the wars, the friendship. Atmaramas Muneo, those who have turned their back on all material considerations, dedicate themselves to drinking in the nectar about the virile pastimes of Krishna, because they have nothing to do with mundane affairs. They're entirely spiritual. In fact, If you hear works of fiction, fictional stories, that's going to further bind you to birth, death, disease, and old age in this material world. The result, the effect of hearing katha about Krishna from bona fide reciters is just the opposite. Tajjoshadapu apavarga vartmani, frees her from all stress, from all anxiety, and illuminates the vartmani, illuminates the path back to home, back to God. The literal translation of this verse by Prabhupada: in the association of devotees, discussion of the pastimes and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very pleasing and satisfying to the ear and the heart. By cultivating such knowledge, one gradually becomes advanced on the path of liberation, and thereafter he is freed and his attraction becomes fixed. Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Vyavishatmaka buddhi eka kuru nandana bahu shakaya nantascha buddhi avyavishayana. Those are conditioned souls, those who are bound for repeated birth, death, disease, and old age in this material world, are characterized by a fragmented consciousness. Their consciousness is all over the map. Many branched, bahushaka, Krishna describes their consciousness. On the other hand, those who are candidates for liberation, are not again going to take another material body and endure a cycle of birth, death, disease, and old age in this material world, are single-pointed. They are focused on the lotus feet of Krishna. And Krishna makes a promise, a covenant. And if you relish in the association of devotees the topics about the name, form, activities, and pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, if you make that your lifestyle, that's your habit, Krishna personally promises that at the time of leaving this body, he'll come and save you. Tesha maham samudarta mritu shamsara shagarat. Shagarat means this ocean of birth, death, disease, and old age. If you're dropped in the middle of the ocean, doesn't matter how good a swimmer you are, you're not going to be able to save yourself. You'll only be saved through the intervention of a big ocean liner or a helicopter dropping you a lifeline. Krishna promises that he will personally come on the back of Garuda to save someone whose lifelong habit is hearing and chanting the holy names of the Lord, associating with devotees and taking prasadam. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I'll finish today with a story illustrating this point. It's many years ago. We didn't have the digital era. There were no emails. Everything that was communicated to the temples throughout the world came out of Los Angeles from Corundar. And it came in the form of a Selectric typed newsletter that was mimeographed. So I remember in Australia, one day we got the following account. It was South Africa, huge Indian community in South Africa. It was Janmashtami. Devotees had set up an outdoor stage. There were thousands and thousands of people. And you may or may not know, Krishna took his appearance at midnight on Janmashtami. And so the celebrations start a little late, 7, 8 o'clock. And there's kirtan and discussions, plays and dramas. And it all builds up to the midnight hour. It's kind of like Times Square on New Year's Eve. And at the midnight hour, the time when Krishna appeared, there's conch shells, there's gongs, there's uproarious kirtan. The altar may have been closed. At that time, it's dramatically opened, lit up with candles. The devotees all shout, Jai, 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 Jai. So there was one elderly gentleman, a life member, didn't live in the temple, but he'd been very supportive, extremely generous with donations for many, many years. Chanted his japa with his family, his children, his grandchildren, was a strict, diligent member in every respect. And although the stage was generally limited to the devotees who were doing kirtan, this man, around 11 o'clock, an hour before the celebrations peaked, this man came up on stage and he was dancing and chanting ecstatically, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. And if it had been an ordinary person who got themselves up on stage, they would have been kindly but firmly asked to leave. But this man, the devotees knew him. He was a solid life member, a solid practitioner. He was elderly, and so there's a natural respect for the elderly. So he was up there chanting and dancing at 11 o'clock, became 11:30, and then 11:30 became 11:45, and finally it's 11:55, 11:56, 11:57, 11. And so there's a lot of chanting, there's a lot of crescendo building up, but those who were closest to this man at 11:59 saw him raise his arms as high as he could, look up into the sky. It was an outdoor program. And he said, Krishna has come for me on Garuda, and dropped dead on the stage. So let that be you. Let that be me. Maybe not 11:59 on Janmashtami. But this scene certainly sets an inspiring and challenging example to each and every one of us, that when it's our time, let us have diligently heard and chanted the message of Krishna, the all-attractive, virile Supreme Personality of Godhead, from the qualified persons in the association of devotees, so that at the last moment when this bag of bones drops inert, lifeless onto the floor, we will have been able to raise our arms, lift our eyes, and say, Krishna has come for me on the back of Garuda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. Thanks, Suze. I think your name is Sujanya or something similar. Motivational Monday, Ki Jai. I have a little video here I'd like to share with you. I hope I can do it right, not mess up the technical part of it. But if everything goes well, this is a video taken by Mahaprabhu Das the morning of the Festival of Colors, probably 2018 or something. Everything's very quiet, peaceful. You can see a few tents, a few food carts, a few flags, but no people have arrived. Even the volunteers haven't really shown out. Later on, there'll be thousands and thousands of people in this very area. But this is a very lyrical presentation of the temple. A lot of drone shots showing the surrounding mountains and agricultural fields. So let me not say too much more about it in case our technology goes awry and we're not, in the end, able to see it. So let me do the screen share here. And let's see. Okay, all right. Let me see. Not, as you know, I am not the most expert. Okay, I think we've got it up here. I don't know how. Maybe I'll look on my phone to make sure that this is coming through to you. Sometimes I can see it and others can't. So let me just take a moment here to go to Caru, Utah on my phone and see what you're seeing. No, it doesn't appear. Sometimes I can see it. Okay, I can see it. Okay, I think we're good. I think we're good. So let me just take a moment. This is some views, some panoramic views of the Krishna temple done a few years ago from a devotee named Mahaprabhu. Okay, I think we're good. I think. Well, thank you, Mahaprabhu. Uh, that's our little bit of heaven here in Spanish for Utah. Those are God's 15 acres, and we have another wonderful property of 4 acres in downtown Salt Lake City. Um, so how do I get back to the Facebook? I was going to acknowledge those who have joined us, but I seem to have actually lost the Facebook interface, so I apologize. But I see that Gurutron Singh, and I see a lot of emojis. Wow, a veritable explosion of emojis. Thank you for that, Justin. Justin says, what a beautiful setup you've got out there. Rakesh Raghava, so beautiful. Ram Kishore, wow, bliss. Advaita Charya, is it published? I don't know what you're referring to about what's published. Raquel, thank you so much. Chris informed us he's our #1 foremost volunteer of all time. When he walked in the door, January 28th, 2020, he said, I'm going to stay for a year. Our minimum stay is 2 weeks. He made a year's commitment, kept to it, been a joy. By Bobby, I don't think could even function without relying upon him as a right-hand man. And he just told us that January 28th, this 1-year anniversary is coming up, and he's going to extend. He's finding the spiritual support and practices that he's been looking for here, and so he wants to extend. And he also met another wonderful volunteer, Nicole, here. They developed a bit of a relationship. So it looks like we're going to continue to have their assistance and wonderful association moving forward in 2021. So you can congratulate us. You can feel happy for this old couple of Caru and Vi who've got some young people to assist them in maintaining the property that you just saw. Sanjay says that's beautiful. Raquel, she says it's absolutely beautiful. She loved visiting us. We loved having the opportunity to host Raquel and Sean, Chris's parents, not too long ago. Gurutran Singh, Rakesh, thank you. Who else? We've got Terry and Taruni. Appreciate it. Rupa Manjari, Govinda Das, so many. Thank you so much. And let's see. Yeah, I don't have any more information available on my phone, but whoever you are who have liked, shared, commented, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We like this to be as two-way as possible, as interactive as possible. So please comment, please share, and please join us when we continue our Katha tomorrow, Transcendental Tuesday, beginning at 7:30 Mountain Daylight Time. Please join me. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.